صباح الخير. القراءة من مزمور 19. السماوات تحدث بمجد الله، والفلك يخبر بعمل يديه. يوم إلى يوم يذيع كلاما، وليل إلى ليل يبدي علما. لا قول ولا كلام، لا يسمع صوتهم. في كل الأرض خرج منطقهم، وإلى أقصى المسكونة كلماتهم. جعل للشمس مسكنا فيها، وهي مثل العروس الخارج من حجلته. يبتهج مثل الجبار للسباق في الطريق. من أقصى السماوات خروجها، ومدارها إلى أقاصيها، ولا شيء يختفي من حرها. ما أعظمك، ما أمجد اسمك أيها الإله، لك المجد من هلأ للأبد. تكوين 1. في البدء خلق الله السماوات والأرض، وكانت الأرض خربة وخالية، وعلى وجه الغمر ظلمة، وروح الله يرف على وجه المياه. وقال الله كل شيء بكلمة قدرته، الذي وهو بهاء مجده ورسم جوهره، وحامل كل الأشياء بكلمة قدرته. قال الله لتكن أنوار في جلد السماء، لتفصل بين النهار والليل، وتكون لآيات وأوقات وأيام وسنين. وتكون أنوار في جلد السماء لتنير على الأرض، وكان كذلك. أما الإنسان فخلق الله الإنسان على صورته، على صورة الله خلقه. ورأى الله كل ما عمله، فإذا هو حسن جدا. يتمجد اسمك يا رب. نركع ونرثو أمامك يا ملك الملوك ورب الأرباب، صانع السماوات والأرض. عقولنا يا رب ما بتقدر تدرك عظمتك ودقتك وإدارتك وتنظيمك. لك المجد. وأنت نفسك يا رب، محبتك كانت لنا محبة أبدية، وأدمت لنا الرحمة، وتنازلت من عليائك تتموت عنا، تتعطينا حياة أفضل، وتعطينا حياة أبدية. لك المجد يا رب. منبارك اسمك بهيدا الصباح، مع الفلك، مع السماوات، مع كل أعمال يديك. نرفعك عاليا. عظيم أنت يا رب في محبتك، عظيم في شفائك، عظيم في خلاصك، عظيم يا رب في أنات قلبك تتأنى علينا وتصبر. لك المجد يا رب. جايين بهيدا الصباح نقدم سجودنا وإكرامنا وعبادتنا ومحبتنا، وأفواه تسبيح وشكر وتعظيم لشخصك. لك المجد من هلأ للأبد. آمين.
يا سيدي لما أرى نجومك، وكل ما يدور في الأفلاك، أسمع صوت الرعد في غيومك، وكلها صنعت يداك. نفسي تغني يا مخلصي، ما أعظمك
Good morning. This is the second part of a two-part series on John the Baptist. The first part was on the church website on the 24th of January, and I have no idea what date this is going to be put out, but it's the second part, so I want some forgiveness. Number one, for giving a sermon that had to be split into two parts. Number two, for the fact that when you start seeing the sermon, it will just start, without any introduction at all, and I will just start talking, so forgive that, and it's right in the middle of the story about John the Baptist. Where we've reached is the end of John the Baptist in terms of his ministry. We've come to the end of his ministry, and the slide that I begin with, I believe, is the beginning of the end, as John goes to prison. John's response, great humility. Everything else is irrelevant. And then there is a massive, massive change in John's circumstances. Everything collapses. From the most popular speaker in the desert to nothing. He's an outspoken man, and he has outspoken one too many times. What he's done is Herod has taken as his wife the wife of his brother Philip. And this was wrong. And John, every time he saw Herod passing or said to the people, what Herod has done is completely against God's rules. It's completely against what God has planned. And he shouldn't have taken Herodias from his brother Philip. And Herod got so upset and so fed up with this outspoken prophet that he put him in prison. And the prisons of that day were not like the prisons of this day. Probably he was put in a deep, dark dungeon, almost like a well, a fairly big well. The bottom of it might be muddy, but it was probably very, very dark. And no food provided, no exercise provided. He was put in something like that. And as he gets into this thing, don't forget, he's an outdoor man. He eats wild honey. He catches locusts. He's stuck in this thing. The doubt starts to come in. Far from the desert he loves, John starts to doubt. And John waited and waited. He thought, I'm not going to be left here. I'm a special messenger. God will send a troop of angels to lift me out of the cell. I don't know what he waited for. And it was very, very difficult. He had his disciples. He had a few disciples, still brought him food, still cared for his needs. But doubt had set in. And so one day he called his disciples and he said, go to my cousin. Go to Jesus. And I want you to take this message to Jesus. And this is the message that he sent to Jesus. And I want to read this. When John heard in prison what Christ was doing, he sent his disciples to ask him, are you the one who was to come, or should we expect someone else? Jesus replied, go back and report to John what you see and hear. The blind receive sight, the lame walk, those who have leprosy are cured, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the good news is preached to the poor. Blessed is the man who does not fall away on account of me. As John's disciples were leaving, Jesus began to speak to the crowd about John. What did you go out into the desert to see? A reed swayed by the wind? If not, what did you go out to see? A man dressed in fine clothes? No, those who wear fine clothes are in king's palaces. Then what did you go out to see? A prophet? Yes, I tell you, and more than a prophet. This is the one about whom it was written, I will send my messenger ahead of you, who will prepare your way before you. I tell you the truth. Among those born of women, there has not risen anyone greater than John the Baptist. Yet he who is least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he. From the days of John the Baptist until now, the kingdom of heaven has been forcefully advanced, and forceful men lay hold of it. For all the prophets and the law prophesied until John. And if you are willing to accept it, he is the Elijah who is to come. He who has ears, let him hear. He sent to Jesus the greatest, maybe not the greatest, a great question. I can think of one other question I think is greater, but I think this is amazing. Are you the one? Are you the one? Or should we wait for someone else? John has found himself so in doubt that he has to send a question to Jesus. I expected something different. I'm a favoured messenger. I'm the great prophet. I thought you'd have freed me. I thought God would have treated me different. And I think from this come 3 quick points. The first is, look how far John has fallen. From a man who cried out, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. I testify that this is the Son of God. A man given divine inspiration to say those things. A divine revelation has got to a place where he has to say, are you the one? And so often we reach there. Sometimes we reach there. Everybody has to answer this question about Jesus. Everybody on earth has to have an answer. Either yes, you are the one, or no, you are not the one. They have to make a decision about this question. Is he the one? We all have to answer it. Some of you who are watching, I doubt it, but some of you who are watching may have reached this place. I'm part of a church. My mum and dad go. I've been going forever. I can't remember a day when I haven't been forced to watch these videos. Are you the one, Jesus? I don't feel anything. I don't feel it moving. I felt it sometime, but I don't feel it now. Perhaps you're like that. Perhaps you had a time when you really felt it moving, and now the movement has gone. Like John, behold the Lamb of God, the Son of God, and now he feels absolutely nothing, to a point where he has to send to Jesus. Are you the one? Are you the one? The doubts begin. And isn't the reply of Jesus amazing? He didn't say, gather around. John's disciples, gather around. Go back and tell him, yes, I am the one. So what do you need to tell him? You don't need to tell him anything. Go quickly. Have you got it? What are you meant to say? Yes, I am not. Yes. Quickly run back to prison and tell him. He doesn't say that. Jesus never says that. I don't know why he doesn't say it. But he realizes the hurt that is in this question. His heart breaks for his cousin. A good friend. And you'll see later how good a friend John the Baptist was to Jesus, and how broken Jesus was at the end of John the Baptist's life. And his heart breaks for his cousin, that he has to come and say this, are you the one? But what he does say to them is, sit down and watch. And just go back and report to John what you see. Because what you will see is lives changed. Let him decide. And he gives 7 things that he asks them to take back. The blind see, the lame walk, leprosy are healed, deaf hear, dead are raised. The good news is preached to the poor. That's 6. 6 things that Jesus thinks are going to change John's mind. And we need to think in our church, in our lives, in our community, are these 6 things that we are doing. Are we doing these 6 things? Is this happening in our community? Jesus saw these things as 6 important things. Notice not one of them is a prayer meeting. Not one of them is a Sunday morning meeting. Not one of them. They're all something different. And then in the 7th line, he says this, which I don't fully understand. Blessed is the man who does not fall away on account of me. John is falling. And he knows that John will hear that last sentence from his disciples. And the last thing he said was, what did he say? Blessed is the one who does not fall. I don't understand it, John. Do you understand it? John understood it perfectly. Blessed is the one who does not fall away on account of me. Stay, John, stay. Do not go. And do not go because of my failings. Jesus' failings? Jesus never fails. But we perceive him to fail. I thought of putting a thing in here called my perceived failings. John, you think I failed. I haven't. This is your job. This is the greatest good. I know I'm only planning good for you. That's incredible, isn't it? That he said, please don't leave because of me. Because you think I've done something wrong. Because you think, as Jesus, I've not saved you. As Jesus, I haven't come to visit you. You feel that I've done. Don't fall away. Stay strong. Hold fast, John. Because Jesus is the only reason we stay. There's no other reason to stay. Whatever you're doing, there's no other reason to stay. That was the bell. That tells me I've been exactly 27 minutes, I think. 27 minutes. So they're probably going to throw half of this out. Don't worry about it. Okay? Look at the work. He tells John, look at the work. Lives are changed. Lives are transformed. Families are happy because the deaf hear. Because the blind see. And good news is preached to the poor. And that is the most important. The gospel is preached. John, stay. And they get the idea, and that as they're walking away, Jesus has this huge crowd with him, and John's disciples have spoken to Jesus, and notice they don't hang around, they leave, and as Jesus sees them going, he can't help himself. He thinks about his cousin, he thinks of all the magnificent things he did, and he starts to speak to the crowd. See, you know who those are? Those are John's disciples, and they're going to take a message back to him, and I hope he's going to be okay. And Jesus gives a recommendation letter of John the Baptist. A recommendation letter from the king. As a principal, I've got to write loads and loads of recommendation letters. I'm always terrified of writing the same thing all the time, but so many people are the same, and nothing really stands out except in some exceptional students. And it's very difficult to write those things when you don't really know the students, but Jesus knew John. And this is his recommendation letter for John. And he starts with the words, what did you go out to see? When you went out to see John the Baptist, what did you go out to see? Did you go to see a reed swayed? Now, a reed swayed we find quite common in English now because it's come down in English literature. You're a reed swayed by the wind. Where did that come from? It came from Jesus' actual words. It means, are you someone whose opinion goes and flows with the way that people think? With the year that you're living in, and do you change when the community around you changes, or are you somebody who stays strong like John? He was not a reed swayed by the wind. He was a rock solid person. Did you go to see somebody in fine clothes? Perhaps this was almost a joke on the camel hair. You didn't go out to see fine clothes there in king's palaces. You went out to the desert to see John. Did you go out to see a prophet? Yes. But you didn't just see a prophet. You saw more than a prophet. John, what a great recommendation letter. What will Jesus say about you? What did you go to see in Steve? Well, no one ever comes to see me, but what did you go to see in Steve? What did you see? What did you go to see in John? A prophet? More than a prophet. I tell you, more than a prophet. What is more than a prophet? A great prophet? Is he the greatest prophet? Is he greater than Elijah? Is he greater than Moses? Is this man absolutely the greatest thing? And then we have an amazing paragraph, which starts with, I tell you the truth, and ends with, he who has ears to hear, let him hear. And we know that anything in between those two statements is absolutely essential. Rarely does Jesus start anything with, I tell you the truth. And so he says, I tell you the truth. Among those born of woman, there is no one greater than John the Baptist. Moses, no. David, no. Elijah, no. Joshua, no. The greatest that ever lived was John the Baptist. What an amazing, amazing statement there. But the least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he. What does this mean? What does this mean? And I don't want to spend too long because I think it means lots of stuff that I don't completely understand. But I think that he's saying, even if you're the greatest person on the earth, if you're not in the kingdom, you're nothing. Even if you're huge, but you're not in the kingdom, you're nothing. Because people in the kingdom are greater than the greatest person on earth. And that's why the most important thing for you and me is to be belonging to him. And so we come to the final act. And the final act is a terrible, terrible thing. And I'll read it to you because I think it's a beautiful passage of Scripture. Now Herod had arrested John and bound him and put him in prison because of Herodias, his brother's Philip's wife. For John had been saying to him, "It's not lawful for you to have her." Herod wanted to kill John, but he was afraid of the people because they considered him a prophet. On Herod's birthday, the daughter of Herodias danced for them and pleased Herod so much that he promised with an oath to give her whatever she asked. Prompted by her mother, she said, "Give me here on a platter the head of John the Baptist." The king was distressed, but because of his oaths and his dinner guests, he ordered that her request be granted and had John beheaded in the prison. His head was brought in on a platter and given to the girl, who carried it to her mother. John's disciples came and took his body and buried it. Then they went and told Jesus. We see someone who's the exact opposite of John. Herod. Terrified to be seen to be something that he really was. He obeyed because of the people. It says, scared, the king was distressed, but because of his oaths and his dinner guests, he ordered the requests. He's the exact opposite of John. He is a reed swayed with the opinions of his guests. He could have stood up and said, "You stupid girl, I meant if you want a horse, I'm going to buy you a horse. Or if you want gold, I'm going to buy you gold." I didn't mean to kill John the Baptist. Go away. Go away. I'm not going to give you a horse. I'm not going to give you gold. That's what he meant. But because he was such a weak man, he had to go through with it. And what a fateful party that was. A seductive stepdaughter. Because she wasn't his daughter. She was the daughter of her mother. She was the daughter of Philip, his brother. He was her uncle. A weak king, an unforgiving, slighted woman who could not forget that she hated John the Baptist. The mother Herodias hated John the Baptist so much she could not move on in her life. A perfect dance. She seduced them, all of them, with her fantastic dance. And then creating the perfect storm for a terrible death. The greatest man that ever lived, according to Jesus, ended his life with his head on a platter, in front, dripping blood, in front of a group of dinner guests, because a woman hated him so much. Can't be God's will, surely. It's madness. God's will, the greatest man on earth, ends his life because of a stupid girl and a crazy woman. Cannot be God's will. This is impossible. John should be free. John should be out there. John should be doing. John should be this. John should be that. We all know the answers, but God knows the greater answer. But it happened. And it's not madness, because it's his way, not our way. We know the way we wanted that to end, and it wasn't like that. We know the way we wanted it. in your life for things that go His way, not your way. You pray for things to happen. I want this to happen. I want that to happen. I want a better job. I want my son to be healed. I want this. I want that. But it doesn't happen like you want. It happens like His want. And you can work out if you're going to go with His will or you're going to go against His will. You can fight at every step. I don't want this. I don't want God to do this. I don't want God to do this. Or you can accept His will. And right at the very end, they told Jesus. The disciples came and took His body. They never got His head. They buried John the Baptist without his head, because his head belonged to the woman. Don't know what she did with it. They came and took His body, and when they buried it, they went and told Jesus. He knew the moment that the soldiers came into the room to behead John the Baptist. Jesus knew, and He was miles away. But they still went to tell Him. And when they got there, it says here, He withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place. He needed to grieve. He knew that John had gone to a better place. He knew that the place where John had gone would be where he wanted to be right now, in the Father's bosom, right next to his dad. And he knew John was there, but John had left him. And he needed to go, and he needed to be alone, and he needed to grieve. And it's incredible that the King of all the earth needed to grieve. Not to be sad, but to understand that he was alone, and that one of his closest friends, his cousin, had gone to be with his dad. As he went to a boat in a solitary place, people ran after him. Feed us, they cried. And he fed them, feeding of the 5,000. And then after the feeding of the 5,000, he went up on a mountainside, alone, by himself, to pray. He needed that solitude. We need that solitude. Prayer is our haven, our sanctuary, our safe place. He needed to talk to his dad. And we need to get that back in our lives. A Father who loves us, who sees the great picture. We need to marinate ourselves in his presence. Final slide. What about John the Baptist? If you want to be great in his kingdom, you've got to be a servant. John was a servant. He realized his place in the kingdom. You've got to speak strongly. You've got to be unashamed. You've got to accept his path. You've got to accept the path God has for you, even though you don't think it might be the best. Look always to Jesus. Not everything works out like we like it, but it always works out in the right way. Let's pray. Father, I thank you for this magnificent man who reached halfway through his life and went into deep doubt and was not spared. And I pray that we will learn things from his life that we can apply in ours. I ask this in the name of the great King. Amen.
أنا بحبك يا رب، أنا بعبدك يا رب، أنا قلبي طول الطريق هيفضل ملكي ليك، وعليا طول الطريق هتفضل ثابتة عليك. أنا بحبك يا رب، أنا بحبك يا رب، أنا بعبدك يا رب، أنا بعبدك يا رب، أنا قلبي طول الطريق، هيفضل صخرتي. يسوع هو الحياة، يسوع هو الطريق، يسوع الحق يلي يحرر كل أسير. يسوع هو البداية، يسوع هو النهاية، يسوع